Good afternoon, Wesley Chapel Youth. My name is Anya Evinger, and I'm so happy that you've joined us today for our Sunday school lesson. I'm one of the 7th and 8th grade Sunday school teachers at Wesley Chapel United Methodist Church, and we have moved our Sunday school lessons to Saturday at 4 p.m. for live stream. That way you may watch it at your convenience on Sunday, physical worship, if that's what your family chooses to do at this time during phase 1 of re-entry. Before I get started on the youth lesson, I do want to make a couple of announcements. Number one, if you're not already connected with us on the Wesley Chapel Youth Facebook group, or if you're not already following Instagram's page for Wesley Chapel Youth Group, please do that. We put announcements and important information on there. Pastor Peter Williams is our youth leader at Wesley Chapel United Methodist Church, and he is hosting a Wednesday night Bible study on Zoom. If you want to participate in that, we can get the link to you. He's also hosting game nights on Friday nights. It's a virtual game night. It's really exciting. I know that a lot of the students are really enjoying it. So if you want to get involved in that game night, again, drop us a message, let us know, connect with us on social media, and we'll get that information for you. Another announcement is that tomorrow, Sunday, May 17th, at 2 p.m., we are going to honor the graduates of Wesley Chapel United Methodist Church. So our seniors in high school and those who are graduating from college with different degrees are going to be honored in a parade through the Wesley Chapel parking lot. So in years past, we have called those students up on stage, and as a church, we've applauded their efforts and given them public recognition. Obviously, in a time of social distancing, we are unable to hold that traditional celebration, and it's usually followed by a meal, and we just have a lot of fun celebrating them. So the youth team has developed a plan to still celebrate those graduating this year. And it's going to take place on May 17th at 2 p.m. We would love for you and your family to join us. It's really simple. You come to Wesley Chapel United Methodist Church. We have a route through the parking lot that will go past all of those people we're celebrating because they're graduating. And you honk your horns, and you can roll down your windows if you want to, and shout or scream or yell or cheer. I'm personally an Indiana woo girl, so I'll be rolling around the parking lot, woo, out the windows with my jazz hands. And I even volunteered. I told the youth leader team that if they need more cars, I'll just keep doing laps around the parking lot and just woo every time I go past all of these graduates as many times as I need to. But we're really excited to honor them. It's a huge accomplishment to graduate, and their plans have been interrupted by COVID-19, as have all of ours. So those are a few things going on in the Wesley Chapel Youth Group, and hope that you stay connected with us. Thank you again for joining us. I'm excited today to continue with you our series on Popular. This is Popular Week 2, and the bottom line today is doing big things starts with small steps. And this is something that's hard for me. Like especially in an age with immediacy of information, it's really hard for me to be patient to get to a finish line. And I love this lesson because I get to share with you some of those things that I can look back and realize the small steps led to big things in my life, as I'm sure they will if they haven't already in yours. So remember, too, that we just finished up that series called In My Opinion. And one of the lessons was about preconceived notions and judgment. So I'm just reminding you, please don't judge me for drinking coffee at 4:30 from my sister's Harry Potter mug. I just needed a little boost of energy this afternoon. No, really, it's just one of those pretty days where coffee sounded good. So, and since I'm not close to a Starbucks or Coffee Crossing, I made my own vanilla latte. It's delicious. All right, let's get started with our lesson for the week. This week, in our series, Popular Week 2, we are talking about influence. Now, what exactly is influence? This is where, if we were in the classroom, in our Sunday school room, I would let you guys turn and talk. in chat, what does influence mean to you? And then I would tell one of you, somebody ask Siri, what does influence mean? And you would all hop on your phones to try to race to see who gets the definition quickest. Well, I'm going to give you the definition since this is via YouTube. It's the ability to have an effect on someone. It's the ability to affect things like someone's behaviors, thoughts, or choices. When you have influence over someone, it means you have the potential to change something about who they are, what they think, or how they live their lives. Now, I don't know about you, but when I hear that word influence, it's not always a positive thing in my mind. In fact, sometimes it's just a long list of things my parents and teachers and coaches told me when I was your age. Don't hang out with that kid. He's a bad influence. You can't watch that show. It's not a good influence on you. You listen to that song? It has cuss words in it. That's such a bad influence. Oops. I was in middle school when one of Eminem's CDs came out. I remember that conversation with my mom and dad. They were really upset that I listened to that CD with my friends. It's a bad influence. Your friends should be people who have a good influence on you. Anybody's mom tell you that? Guilty. Oh, this is a good one. My parents still use this one, right? You guys know my little sister and brother. Yeah. All right, here it is. Your little brother and sisters look up to you. You influence them. Make good choices. Be a good influence. You better be a good influence on the people around you. My mom always pulled out my middle name too. Anya Lise, if I hear you've been a bad influence. Does that sound familiar? Do the adults in your life tell you some of those things right now too? Have I ever said that to you in Sunday school class? Think about this for a second. When you hear the word influence, it's so easy to automatically put the word bad in front of it. I think that's because we're so much more familiar with the idea of bad influences than we are with good influences. Bad influences get more of our attention and more of our energy in society than good influences. And maybe it's because the adults in your life are a lot like the ones that were in mine when I was in middle school and high school. Your parents, your teachers, your coaches, maybe even your youth leaders are always talking to you about bad influences. They're telling you not to be bad influences, not to be the kinds of friends or teammates or significant others who lead someone towards things that are not good for them. Don't encourage your friends to break rules or lie to your parents or cheat on that test. In other words, don't be a bad influence on the people in your life. Or maybe they're not telling you not to be a bad influence, but telling you not to hang out with the people who are a bad influence. People who will lead you toward things that aren't good for you. Avoid that kid who parties too hard, or avoid the girl who gossips all the time. Avoid the kid who got suspended last week. Can you get suspended during e-learning? Don't tell me, I don't want to know. Don't let the way they act or the choices they make influence the way you act or the choices you make. Now, here's the deal. The adults in your life don't say all of this stuff about bad influences because we're mean or strict or want to kill all the fun you'll ever have in life. Believe it or not, we say it because we love you. We want to protect you from the people or things that might influence your life away from God's best for you. We want to help you become the best version of yourself. And sometimes we recognize the people who draw you away from the best version of you. But can we just be honest for a second? Sometimes the thought of being a good influence feels like a lot of responsibility, right? Like you have to do all the right things, make all the right choices, and have all the right answers all the time. Nobody can do that, and trying to sounds exhausting. And on the other side, the idea of only hanging out with people who influence you in positive ways doesn't sound like very much fun. Maybe they don't get along with the crowd or what they're doing, or they always follow the rules, or maybe they go against what's popular. That doesn't always seem like a great time, does it? But here's the thing. When we think about influence in these ways, we're missing the whole picture. It makes it seem like the kind of influence you have is based only on your own behaviors and choices. Like if you make good decisions, you have good influence. But if you make bad choices, you suddenly become a bad influence. While our choices and behaviors do have a lot to do with our influence, I think there's a lot more to this influence thing than we sometimes realize or give credit to. There's a cool picture in the Bible of what I think influence is really about. And I want us to look at it together today. It's from a book called Acts, which chronicles the early church. It was written about the spread of Christianity and the start of the church after Jesus came to earth. You see, the guys who were leading this movement of Christianity, they weren't the most popular people around. They weren't famous or super cool. They weren't known for having the most followers on early TikTok accounts. No, they were just a group of people who believed in Jesus, began to follow his teachings, and wanted to share those teachings with others. These guys were known as apostles of the church, which is just another way to say they were the leaders and teachers spreading the movement of Christianity. And one of these guys named Peter was actually called by Jesus himself to be one of the leaders who would help start his church. Now, here's what's interesting about that. Peter wasn't the best decision maker. In fact, Peter made a lot of bad choices during the time he spent with Jesus. He had a tendency to be angry, cowardly, and even a liar at times. Still, this is one of the guys that Jesus chose to help spread his message to the people around him. Here's what I think is so cool about that. Jesus knew that Peter's ability to influence others wasn't just about his behavior or choices. It was about God working in him. Peter had influence not because of anything he did or didn't do, but because God gave it to him. God gave him the influence he needed to be part of leading and growing the church. All Peter had to do was say yes to it, one step at a time. And that's exactly what he did. Look what happened because of it. If you go ahead and turn in your books to Acts chapter 2, verses 42 through 47, your Bibles, your Bibles. So I'm going to read to you today from my ESV version. I have my NIV version and NLT version, but we're going to read an ESV. I like to change it up sometimes. So ESV, Acts chapter 2, verses 42 through 47. And if I remember correctly, I'm pretty sure Pastor Tony did a live video on this exact verse recently. And they, talking about the disciples, talking about believers, talking about the apostles. Okay, so the first Christians known after Jesus left this earth. They devoted themselves to the apostles' teaching and the fellowship and the breaking of bread and prayers. And awe came upon every soul, and many wonders and signs were being done through the apostles. And all who believed were together and had all things in common. And they were selling their possessions and belongings and distributing the proceeds to all, as any had need. And day by day, attending the temple together and breaking bread in their homes, they received their food with glad and generous hearts, praising God and having favor with all the people. And the Lord added to their number day by day those who were being saved. Today, we know that this passage describes the first church. okay? The first picture of the early Christian church. But back then, I don't know if those guys who were part of it knew what they were building. Peter and his community were simply using the influence they had. They were influencing the people around them to do what Jesus had called them to do. Now, what has Jesus called us to do? There are two things we always talk about. The first is to love God, and the second is to love people. They weren't saying yes to being good influences. Instead, they were saying yes to using their God-given influence for good, one small step at a time. Were they the most popular guys? Probably not. Did they see results right away? Nope. Did they get the credit they deserved for the good they were doing? Not always. But still, they kept going. They used their influence for good, for God. That gave them the motivation to take small steps in the right direction. And those steps impacted and influenced the people around them to do the same. That's what I want you to see today. Doing big things starts with small steps. Your ability to influence others isn't about whether or not your behavior is always good or bad. It isn't about getting it right all the time. It's about saying yes to using what influence you one step at a time. Peter, sorry, my internet cut out. I hope that I'm still online. Looks like I am. We're good. So those small steps that Peter and his pals took, let's talk about those. They started a movement that shaped their entire community. So let me show you what I mean. There are 7 steps that we're going to talk about, okay? Step 1, the first thing they did. So we're not talking big picture yet. We're just talking the small, simple steps. Step 1, they followed and devoted themselves to the apostles' teaching and to spending time with each other. So step 1, we're going to follow the teaching being delivered by the apostles and spend our time together learning. That's what we do here in Sunday school, isn't it? We study scripture and we spend time together. Step 2, they let God work through them and were amazed by all that God did. Step 3, they found common ground with others. Step 4, they gave to those in need no matter the cost. Step 5, they shared meals together at home and genuinely enjoyed each other's company. Step 6, they praised God together. Step 7, as a result of all these steps, God grew their church every day. You see, each one of these small steps inched this group closer and closer to having big influence. Each step may have seemed small, insignificant, but it moved them in big ways toward big influence. And the same can be true for you. You can take small steps every single day that inch you closer and closer toward using your influence for good. Because doing big things starts with small steps. Your ability to influence others starts with small steps in the right direction. The more steps you take toward being a positive influence, the more impact your influence will make for good over time. So I want to share with you, I told you at the beginning that I love this lesson because there are so many things in my life that I think about the small steps that were taken to achieve something big. And we can talk about that in real simple terms. For example, if you have been attending Wesley Chapel since the beginning of the year, you know that one of my New Year's resolutions is to run a mini marathon this year. And I had signed up for the mini marathon with the Kentucky Derby Festival. It's one that my dad always runs, and I thought it would be fun to run that with him this year. I guess not with him, behind him, definitely way behind him, but completing the same race. That's what I mean. So I started training on January 6th. I ran 3 miles, I think, or a mile. It might have just been a mile, let's be honest. But I worked up in January to 3 miles and started to try for longer runs. And eventually I got to 4 miles and 5 miles and even to 7 miles. Do you know how long it took me to run 7 miles? An hour and 20 minutes. An hour and 20 minutes to run 7 miles. I couldn't even believe that I did that. I got off the treadmill and I looked at the clock and I looked at the mileage and I was in awe that my body could run for 7 miles for an hour and 20 minutes. Because in January, I could really only run about a mile or two. And it took me 20, 25 minutes. So that small step in the beginning led me in training for that mini marathon. Unfortunately, they canceled the mini marathon and they closed the gym that I worked out at. So now that it's pretty weather, I'm back to training and I'm starting from square one. I ran 1.5 miles today. And I keep reminding myself that that's how you start. You have to take small steps and build up to the big influence that you have. But let's talk. I mean, that's just a goal. That's a big goal that I put down in smaller steps. So that's a very tangible example. Let's talk about how God has used my influence in ways that I never anticipated. So when I was in middle school, I had several friends who I loved to invite over to spend the night. And the rule at my house was if you spent the night on Saturday night, you had to go to church on Sunday. And so one of my friends went to church with me. And she went to church every time she spent the night on Saturday night. She was a very, very close friend. And it got to the point where when she didn't spend the night with me, she started asking her mom and dad to take her to church and her older sister. And so they started going to church on Sundays without spending the night with me. And then they joined the church. And it's so funny. I ran into her a few years ago. And she was so excited to see me and to hear about my family and how my dad was doing, how Pastor Tony was doing. And I never realized the impact or the influence that we had in her life until I saw her as an adult. There have been other times where I've run into somebody from my childhood who, to be quite honest, I may not have recognized or I may not have seen from across the room. And they saw me and they remembered me as Pastor Tony's daughter. And they were excited to share with me how their lives have changed since we left that area and moved on to another church. And so those stories that I hear now about the influence that maybe I had or maybe my family had or my church had even catch me off guard because they were small steps at the time. The other area in my life where I can look back and see that there was big influence, even though it didn't feel like it in the moment, is as a teacher. I've now been teaching for nearly a decade. This will be my 10th year teaching. And that's long enough for former students to be married and having children. And that's long enough for former students to come back and visit me and thank me. And it has been such a wonderful experience every time a former student walks into my classroom to visit and say hi, or when I run into them somewhere in public and they recognize me as Miss Allstott or Mrs. Evinger. And they tell me all about a lesson that they remember learning in my class that I don't remember. Like I teach different stories throughout the year. I've been teaching so long. I don't remember every day's lesson off the top of my head. But somewhere along the way, there was a lesson that a student remembers, and they're so excited to share that with me and to thank me. And that starts with small steps. That starts with small steps in relationship and building a safe classroom environment for students to feel comfortable learning. I will be honest that most of the lessons they remember aren't about commas or capitalization or even Romeo and Juliet. They're usually about life and application. And that's the one that always surprises me. So I'm very blessed to see how God has used my influence in the lives of several different people. That being said, there's so many times where we don't realize the influence we have, and we may never know the true impact that God used us into somebody's life. So just know that every interaction does matter, and you can have that opportunity to be an influence. Remember that the ability to influence someone, it doesn't happen overnight. It didn't come as a result of only making one right decision or all right decisions or having the best behavior all the time. And it definitely didn't come from being the most popular person in the room. No. That influence came from small steps every single day toward being the kind of person who makes a big impact. And the same can be true for you. I think you can become the kind of person who influences people for good. In fact, I think you have the potential to have big influence. You just have to start taking the small steps to get there. So here's what I want you to try. There are 2 things I want you to try this week. Number 1, think about how and in what way you want to influence others. Do you want to be someone who influences others to serve, to be kind, to be generous, to be friendly, to help those in need? What is it that you want to influence the people around you to do or to be? So think about how and in what way you want to influence others. And then step 2, take one small step. Take one small step toward using